The anomaly stretched across 17 star systems like a festering wound in the fabric of space itself. No light passed through it. No energy readings penetrated its depths. Where once proud civilizations had flourished for millennia, now only existed an impenetrable darkness that made reality itself recoil. Captain Vex Thuriel of the hegemony's finest dreadnought, Crimson Dominion, had seen many horrors in his 3 centuries of service, but nothing compared to staring into that absolute void. His ship's sensors screamed warnings as they approached the phenomenon's edge, quantum particles simply ceasing to exist as they crossed the boundary. "Admiral," his tactical officer whispered, mandibles clicking nervously, "the readings are impossible. It's as if space-time itself has been burned away." The Admiral's compound eyes reflected the bridge's crimson lighting as he studied the tactical displays. 17 star systems. Gone. Not destroyed. Erased. The hegemony's greatest scientists had spent 2 standard years trying to understand what they called the Void Scar, but their instruments could barely comprehend its edges, let alone its interior. "Any word from the Nexus Confederation probe?" Vex Thuriel asked, though he already knew the answer. "Lost contact the moment it crossed. The threshold, sir. Same as the Quantum Republic's Deep Space Explorer and the Stellar Union's research vessel. 3 galactic powers, united only in their terror of this phenomenon that had appeared without warning. The greatest military minds of 1,000 species had gathered to witness the impossible, a region of space where matter, energy, and the very laws of physics had been completely and utterly annihilated. But Vex Thuriel had read the classified reports. He knew what the other admirals refused to acknowledge. The Void Scar wasn't random destruction. It was a path. A perfectly straight line through space, 17 systems wide, stretching from the outer rim territories directly toward the galactic core. Someone, or something, had carved this wound through reality with surgical precision. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," the communications officer announced, her 6 arms dancing across the control interfaces. It's coming from inside the scar." Impossible. Nothing could exist in that void, yet the signal was there, faint but unmistakably present. Vex Thuriel's blood ran cold as the message resolved into something resembling language, though it was unlike anything in the galactic databases. "This is the human vessel Prometheus Rising." The transmission crackled with interference that seemed to bend reality around it. "We are proceeding to target destination. Do not attempt to follow. We repeat, do not attempt to follow." Humans. The word sent ripples of unease through the bridge crew. Every spacefaring civilization knew of them. The species that had emerged from a backwater system only 2 centuries ago, rapidly expanding with technology that defied explanation. They called themselves humanity, and they possessed capabilities that made even the ancient hegemon primarchs nervous. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was power that transcended the known universe. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement within the scar. Something massive is traveling through that void, following the path toward the galactic core." Vex Thuriel stared into the darkness that had consumed 17 civilizations, realizing with growing horror that whatever the humans had done, whatever path they had burned through the very fabric of space itself, was just the beginning. In the depths of that impossible void, something was coming home. 3 days before the Void Scar appeared, Dr. Kalen Wraith stood in the observation deck of humanity's most classified research station, watching as the Prometheus Rising underwent its final modifications. The vessel defied every known law of engineering. A sleek obsidian hull that seemed to absorb light itself, studded with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The neural interface is responding perfectly," reported Chief Engineer. Nixara Voss, her cybernetic implants glowing as she monitored the ship's exotic systems. Captain Orion's consciousness is fully integrated with the Void Drive. Wraith nodded grimly. Captain Dex Orion had volunteered for the procedure knowing full well he would never be human again. The Void Drive required a living mind as its navigation system. Not just any mind, but one willing to embrace the absolute darkness between realities and use it as a highway. The technology had been humanity's greatest secret since the discovery of the Voidstone artifacts on Kepler 442b. Ancient structures that predated known galactic civilization containing blueprints for technology that could manipulate the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The other species saw humans as upstart newcomers, but they didn't understand the burden humanity carried. "The galactic powers are mobilizing," Admiral Cora Blackthorne announced as she entered the observation deck. 17 separate fleets, all demanding answers about our experimental weapons program. Wraith's laugh was bitter. Weapons program. If only they knew. The truth was far more terrifying. The Voidstone artifacts hadn't just contained technology, they contained a warning. Something ancient and malevolent stirred in the galactic core, awakening after eons of slumber. The previous galactic civilization, the ones who had built the Voidstones, had tried to fight it conventionally. They had failed. Their final act was to scatter the artifacts across the galaxy, hoping that someday another species would understand their message. Humanity understood. The calculations were clear. In approximately 3 years, the entity at the galactic core would fully awaken. When it did, it would consume every living thing in the galaxy, feeding on consciousness itself. The only way to stop it was to reach it first, while it was still vulnerable. But getting to the galactic core required passing through 17 heavily populated star systems belonging to species that would never willingly allow a human fleet to transit their space. So humanity had chosen a different path. They would create their own route, burning through reality itself if necessary. Orion's neural patterns are stable, Voss reported. The Void Drive is ready for initialization. Through the observation window, they watched as Captain Orion's transformed vessel began to emit an aura of absolute darkness. Space around the ship rippled and twisted, reality bending under the influence of technology that should not exist. "May the stars forgive us," Wraith whispered, as the Prometheus Rising engaged its impossible drive. The ship didn't simply disappear, it unraveled space-time around it, creating a tunnel of pure nothingness that extended beyond the visible spectrum. Everything in its path simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but edited out of reality itself. The 17 star systems in the direct path to the galactic core flickered and vanished as if they had never been. Through their quantum communicators, they could hear Captain Orion's voice, already distorted by his integration with the Void Drive. "Path is clear. Proceeding to target. Whatever happens to me doesn't matter. Stop the Devourer before it fully awakens." Wraith watched the impossibly black ship disappear into its own tunnel of nothingness, carrying humanity's last hope into the depths of Galactic Center. Behind them, alien fleets would find only empty space where civilizations once thrived, never understanding that humanity had sacrificed 17 systems and their own souls to save the galaxy from something far worse. The Void Scar was not an act of war. It was an act of salvation, paid for in blood and darkness. Captain Dex Orion no longer remembered what it felt like to have a heartbeat. His consciousness flowed through the Prometheus Rising like liquid shadow, every corridor and system an extension of his transformed being. The Void Drive had fundamentally altered him, making him part of the ship's impossible geometry, part of the darkness that propelled them through the tunnel they had carved in reality itself. Through sensors that existed in dimensions beyond the standard 3, he could perceive the wake of destruction behind them. 17 star systems existed now only as memories in the quantum foam, their matter and energy redistributed across probability space. Trillions of lives ended in an instant to prevent the extinction of every living thing in the galaxy. The burden of that knowledge should have crushed him, but Orion found that his hybrid consciousness could compartmentalize grief in ways his human mind never could. He felt the weight of those deaths, acknowledged them, then set them aside to focus on the mission. The Devourer was still 3 parsecs away, still slumbering in its nest of twisted space-time at the galactic core. "Status report, Captain," came the voice of Admiral Blackthorne through quantum entanglement communicators that barely functioned in the Void Scar's impossible physics. 17 hours until we reach the target," Orion replied, his voice now a harmony of frequencies that shouldn't exist. "The Devourer shows signs of increased activity. I think our approach is accelerating its awakening." Through the ship's enhanced sensors, he could perceive the entity they had come to kill. It was vast, beyond comprehension, a writhing mass of dark matter and negative energy that fed on conscious thought itself. During its last awakening cycle, 65 million years ago, it had consumed the galaxy's previous dominant civilization in a matter of months. Only the scattered voidstone warnings had allowed humanity to understand what was coming, but understanding and stopping were 2 different things entirely. "The weapon systems are functioning within acceptable parameters," reported Dr. Wraith. From the research station, her voice distorted by the quantum link. "The reality fragmenter should be able to damage something that exists partially outside normal space-time." Should. That single word carried the weight of the galaxy's survival. Humanity's most advanced scientists had only theoretical models for how to kill something that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The reality fragmenter was built using reversed-engineered voidstone technology designed to unravel the fundamental forces that held exotic matter together. "Captain," came a new voice. "Nixara Voss, monitoring the ship's impossible systems. I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions ahead. The Devourer's gravitational field is affecting the structure of the Void Scar itself." Orion felt the ship shudder as reality reasserted itself around them in chaotic patches. The tunnel they had carved through space-time was becoming unstable, fragments of normal physics bleeding through the absolute darkness. Through his enhanced perception, he could see the entity stirring in its lair, vast tentacles of dark energy reaching out to taste the approaching consciousness. It knew they were coming. "All stations, prepare for combat," Orion commanded, his hybrid consciousness interfacing directly with the ship's weapon systems. "We're about to face something that has survived the death of entire galactic civilizations. If we fail here, everything dies. Not just humanity. Everything that thinks, everything that dreams, everything that hopes." The Prometheus Rising emerged. From the Void Scar into the twisted space surrounding the galactic core, where the laws of physics bent around the Devourer's impossible mass. Ancient ruins of the previous galactic civilization floated in the gravitational maelstrom, testament to the futility of conventional warfare against this entity. But humanity had not come here with conventional weapons. They had come with technology, torn from the void itself, piloted by a consciousness that no longer fully belonged to the material universe. As the Devourer's attention focused on their small ship, Orion felt its hunger washing over him like a tide of absolute darkness. For the first time since his transformation, he smiled with lips he no longer possessed. "Let's see how you handle something that's already dead." The Devourer's response was immediate and overwhelming. Tendrils of living darkness erupted from the galactic core, each one larger than a star system, reaching across impossible distances to grasp at the Prometheus Rising. Where they touched the vacuum of space, reality itself began to unravel, consumed by the entity's insatiable hunger. Captain Orion felt the attack washing over him like a tsunami of pure malevolence. The Devourer wasn't just trying to destroy their ship. It was attempting to devour his consciousness directly, to feed on the hybrid nature of his existence. But Orion had advantages the previous galactic civilization never possessed. His transformation had made him partially immune to conventional reality, able to exist in the spaces between dimensions. "Evasive maneuvers," he commanded, though the concept of evasion had little meaning in the twisted space surrounding the galactic core. The Prometheus Rising didn't so much move as phase through different probability states, sliding between the Devourer's grasping appendages like smoke through a net. Through the quantum link, he could hear the frantic voices of the research team. "Captain, the entity's gravitational field is destabilizing local space-time," Dr. Wraith reported. "If this continues, it could create a cascade effect that reaches beyond the core region." "Then we end this quickly," Orion replied, targeting systems coming online as the ship's reality fragmenter charged to full power. The weapon was humanity's desperate gambit, a device that could theoretically disrupt the exotic matter that composed the Devourer's extra-dimensional body. But as the weapon powered up, Orion felt something impossible. Fear emanating from the ancient entity. Not fear of death. Something that had survived multiple galactic extinction events wouldn't fear simple destruction. No, this was fear of something far worse. "Captain," came Nixaravos's voice, tight with confusion. "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the voidstone ruins surrounding the core. The ancient structures are activating?" Through his enhanced perception, Orion witnessed something that defied all their calculations. The scattered ruins of the previous civilization weren't just debris, they were components of a vast machine, buried in the gravitational chaos around the galactic core for 65 million years. As the Devourer awakened and humanity's ship approached, the ancient technology finally activated. The truth hit Orion like a physical blow. The previous galactic civilization hadn't failed to defeat the Devourer. They had succeeded, but at a cost that made humanity's sacrifice of 17 star systems pale in comparison. They had turned themselves into living batteries, sustaining a prison that had held the entity dormant for millions of years. And now, with their energy finally exhausted, the prison was failing. The Voidstone artifacts on Kepler 442b weren't warnings, Orion transmitted back to the research station, his realization echoing across impossible distances. They were instructions. The previous civilization didn't want us to fight the Devourer. They wanted us to repair their prison. But it was too late for repairs. The ancient containment system was collapsing, 65 million years of accumulated entropy finally overwhelming the sacrificed consciousness of an entire galactic civilization. The Devourer was breaking free of constraints that had held it since before Earth's first vertebrates crawled onto land. "New plan," Orion announced, redirecting the ship's reality fragmenter away from the Devourer itself. "We're not here to kill this thing. We're here to replace the prison." The implications hit the research team instantly. To repair the containment system would require the same sacrifice the previous civilization had made. Entire conscious species would need to surrender their individual existence to become part of the prison's living infrastructure. "Captain," Admiral Blackthorn's voice carried the weight of impossible decisions. "You can't be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Orion cut her off, his hybrid consciousness already interfacing with the failing Voidstone mechanisms. "I'm implementing the only solution that doesn't end with the complete extinction of every thinking being in the galaxy." As the Prometheus Rising moved closer to the ancient ruins, Orion felt the whispers of the previous civilization's sacrificed consciousness. Their individual voices long ago merged into a collective song of eternal vigilance. They welcomed him with gratitude and sorrow, recognizing what he was about to become. The Devourer thrashed against its weakening bonds, sensing that its moment of freedom was slipping away. But Orion was no longer entirely human, no longer bound by the limitations of a single existence. He was becoming something new, something that could bridge the gap between organic consciousness and the Voidstone technology. The prison would be rebuilt, the galaxy would survive, and humanity would pay the price in ways the other species would never understand. The transformation began the moment Captain Orion interfaced directly with the failing Voidstone matrix. His consciousness, already fragmented between human awareness and the ship's impossible systems, suddenly expanded across dimensions he couldn't name. He felt himself scattering across the ancient prison, becoming part of its living architecture. But he wasn't alone. Through the quantum link, he could feel the other volunteers beginning their own transformations. Dr. Kaylin Wraith was the first to follow, her brilliant mind joining with the research station's quantum computers before merging with the Voidstone network. Then came Nixara Voss, her cybernetic implants providing the perfect bridge between organic consciousness and alien technology. Status report. Admiral Blackthorn's voice reached them through increasingly tenuous communication links. Though, the concept of reporting was becoming meaningless as their individual identities dissolved into something greater. The containment field is stabilizing, Orion replied, though his voice now harmonized across frequencies that existed outside normal space-time. But we need more. The Devourer is stronger than it was 65 million years ago. It's been feeding on the quantum fluctuations of the universe itself during its imprisonment. Through his expanded perception, Orion could see the true scope of the entity they were containing. The Devourer wasn't just a single creature. It was a collective consciousness composed of every thinking being it had ever consumed, their minds twisted into instruments of cosmic hunger. Previous galactic civilizations, entire species of philosophers, and poets and dreamers, all reduced to components in a machine of pure consumption. The horror of that revelation was tempered by understanding. This was why the prison required conscious beings as its foundation. Only minds capable of independent thought could resist the Devourer's attempts to corrupt the containment system from within. Every consciousness sacrificed to maintain the prison was a small victory against the entity's influence. "Admiral," came a new voice through the quantum link, Captain Zephyr Nightfall of the deep space research vessel Aurora's Edge. "My crew and I are volunteering for integration. Our ship carries 300 of humanity's best and brightest. Scientists, artists, philosophers. If consciousness is what fuels the prison, we want to contribute." Orion felt a wave of profound sadness wash through the collective awareness he was becoming part of. 300 brilliant minds choosing to sacrifice their individuality for the greater good. But their sacrifice would barely make a dent in what was needed. The prison required not hundreds of conscious beings, but millions. "There has to be another way," Admiral Blackthorn protested. "We can't ask entire populations to—" "You don't understand," interrupted Dr. Wraith, her consciousness now distributed across 17 different Voidstone nodes. "This isn't about asking. Look at the galactic response to the Void Scar. Every species is mobilizing their fleets, demanding answers, preparing for war. They think humanity is the threat." Through sensors scattered across the prison complex, Orion could perceive the massive alien fleets approaching the galactic core. Hundreds of species, unified in their fear and anger at humanity's apparent act of genocide. They were coming to destroy what they saw as a rogue human superweapon, never realizing they were about to doom themselves and everything they loved. "The combined fleet represents nearly 1 billion conscious beings," observed Nixara Voss, her enhanced perception calculating possibilities across multiple probability matrices. "If we could make them understand what we're really fighting." But understanding required trust. And trust was something humanity had shattered when they carved the Void Scar through 17 star systems. The approaching fleets carried species whose friends and families had been among the trillions erased to create humanity's path to the galactic core. "New contacts," reported Captain Nightfall as his crew began their integration with the prison matrix. Long-range sensors detect something massive approaching from the outer rim. ships using voidstone technology, but not human designs. Orion felt his consciousness shift focus, perceiving the new arrivals through the prison's enhanced awareness. The ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases, their hulls inscribed with voidstone patterns that hurt to perceive directly. As they drew closer, a communication signal reached the prison complex, not transmitted through normal space, but carried on quantum fluctuations that bypassed conventional physics entirely. "Greetings, young inheritors," came a voice that resonated across impossible frequencies. "We are the synthesis, what remains of those who built this prison ages ago. We have watched from the spaces between realities, waiting for another species to understand the burden of guardianship." The revelation struck the merged consciousness like lightning. The previous galactic civilization hadn't been completely destroyed. A remnant had survived, transformed beyond recognition, existing in the dimensional spaces around the prison to monitor their sleeping enemy. "You face the same choice we did," the synthesis continued. "Sacrifice everything to maintain the prison, or find another way to feed the Devourer's hunger without destroying all consciousness in the galaxy." As the alien fleets drew closer and the Devourer tested its weakening bonds, Orion realized that humanity's greatest challenge wasn't defeating an ancient entity. It was convincing the galaxy that some forms of survival required sacrifices that made death seem merciful by comparison. Admiral Cora Blackthorne stood in the command center of humanity's last remaining stronghold, watching as the combined galactic fleet approached the core region. 800 ships representing 43 different species, all united in their fury at humanity's apparent genocide. She could see their tactical formations through the quantum feeds, battle groups arranged with mathematical precision around their flagship, the massive hegemony dreadnought Eternal Dominion. "Admiral Vex Thuriel is hailing us," reported communications. Officer Miranda Frost, her voice tight with strain. "All channels full-spectrum broadcast. He's demanding our immediate surrender." Through the viewports, Blackthorne could see the void scar stretching endlessly behind them, that wound in reality that had cost them everything. 17 star systems, trillions of lives. And at the end of that impossible tunnel, her people were slowly merging with alien technology to become part of a prison older than complex life on Earth. "Put him through," she commanded, knowing this might be humanity's last chance to explain what they had really done. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the insectoid features of the hegemony's finest admiral. His compound eyes reflected the bridge lights as he spoke, mandibles clicking with barely controlled rage. "Admiral Blackthorne," Vex Thuriel's translated voice carried the weight of galactic authority. "By order of the Emergency Council, you will surrender all human vessels and submit to immediate detention. The weapon you used to create the void. Scar represents a threat to all sapient life." "Admiral," Blackthorne replied carefully, "what we did wasn't an attack. It was a desperate attempt to save every living thing in the galaxy, including your people." "Save us?" The alien's laughter was a sound like breaking glass. "You erased 17 star systems, entire civilizations gone in an instant. How is that salvation?" Through her neural link to the quantum communication array, Blackthorne could feel the presence of Captain Orion and the others as they continued their transformation into the prison's living components. Their sacrifice was buying her time to convince the galaxy, but that time was running out fast. "The galactic core contains something that makes our actions look like a mercy killing," she explained, transmitting sensor data that showed the Devourer's massive form stirring in its dimensional cage. "This entity has consumed entire galactic civilizations before. If it fully awakens—" "Impossible," interrupted Admiral Kethvar of the Quantum Republic, his crystalline features flickering through the multi-species transmission. "Our long-range sensors detect nothing but stellar phenomena at the core." Your sensors can't perceive it because it exists partially outside normal space-time. Blackthorn pressed on. The previous galactic civilization sacrificed themselves to build a prison around it 65 million years ago. That prison is failing. If we don't maintain it, everything dies. The response was immediate and unanimous disbelief. 43 different species, all convinced that humanity was fabricating an impossible threat to justify their genocidal actions. Even the evidence of the voidstone technology, even the clearly artificial nature of the structures surrounding the galactic core couldn't overcome the simple fact that they had watched humanity murder trillions of innocents. "You have 1 hour to surrender," Vex Ethereal announced, cutting the transmission. Blackthorn stared at the tactical display, watching as the combined fleet moved into attack formation. In her neural link, she could feel Captain Orion's consciousness, fragmenting further as he integrated with more of the prison's systems. "Admiral," came his voice, distorted by his ongoing transformation. "The synthesis has offered us an alternative, but you're not going to like it." The plan was as elegant as it was horrifying. Instead of trying to convince the galactic fleet of the truth, they would let the Devourer demonstrate its power directly. A controlled release, just enough to let the entity's influence reach the approaching ships. The aliens would experience the cosmic hunger firsthand, understand what they were really facing. "How many would we lose?" Blackthorn asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Preliminary calculations suggest 30% casualty rate among the fleet crews." Dr. Wraith's voice echoed from her position within the prison matrix. "Their consciousness would be partially consumed before we could re-establish containment, but the survivors would understand. They would help us maintain the prison." 30%. 240 ships, hundreds of thousands of the galaxy's finest minds, sacrificed to convince the remainder that humanity had been trying to save them all along. "There has to be another way," Blackthorn whispered. "Admiral," Captain Orion's voice was barely recognizable, now harmonizing across frequencies that shouldn't exist. "I can see the probability matrices from inside the prison. If we don't act now, if we let them attack us while the Devourer is still contained, the damage to the prison structure will be catastrophic. The entity will break free completely, and we won't have enough consciousness to rebuild the containment." Through the viewports, she watched the galactic fleet assume attack positions. In 47 minutes, they would begin their assault on humanity's last stronghold, never realizing they were about to doom everything they had ever loved. Admiral Blackthorn closed her eyes and made the hardest decision in human history. Begin the controlled release, and may whatever gods are listening forgive us all. The moment the prison's containment field weakened, reality screamed. Admiral Vex Ethereal felt it first as a whisper in the back of his mind, a hunger that wasn't his own creeping through his consciousness like ice through his veins. Around him, his bridge crew began to convulse as the Devourer's influence touched their minds, showing them visions of cosmic consumption that had lasted for billions of years. What is this?" he gasped, watching as his tactical officers' compound eyes rolled back, revealing nothing but swirling darkness. The entity's presence washed over the galactic fleet like a tide of living nightmare. 237 ships found their crews suddenly experiencing the memories of every civilization the Devourer had consumed. Entire species screaming as their consciousness was absorbed into the collective hunger, their individual thoughts becoming components in an engine of galactic extinction. Admiral Blackthorn watched through the quantum links as ship after ship went dark, their crews either dead or catatonic from the psychic assault. But the survivors, those with strong enough minds to resist complete absorption, finally understood what humanity had been fighting. "Emergency transmission to all fleet commanders," she broadcast across all frequencies. "What you're experiencing is a controlled release. The entity is contained, but barely. This is what will happen to every thinking being in the galaxy if we can't maintain the prison." Through her neural link, She felt Captain Orion's consciousness stretching across impossible dimensions as he struggled to re-establish full containment. But the damage was done. The controlled release had weakened the prison structure, and the Devourer was pressing against its bonds with renewed fury. "We need more minds," Orion's voice echoed from within the Voidstone matrix, his individuality now completely subsumed into the collective awareness that powered the containment field. "The entity is stronger than our calculations suggested. It's been feeding on the quantum uncertainty of the universe itself during its imprisonment." Admiral Vex Thuriel's voice cut through the chaos, his transmission reaching every ship in the fleet. "By the Hegemon's throne, it's real. The hunger, the memories of dead civilizations. How long has this thing been contained?" 65 million years, Blackthorn replied. "The previous galactic civilization sacrificed everything to build this prison. Now it's our turn to maintain it." The reality of the situation settled over the fleet like a shroud. They had come here to destroy humanity for committing genocide, only to discover that humanity had been trying to prevent the extinction of all consciousness in the galaxy. The Void Scar, the 17 destroyed star systems, even the apparently insane decision to burn a path through inhabited space, all of it had been necessary to reach this place before the Devourer fully awakened. "What do you need from us?" asked Admiral Kethvar, his crystalline features reflecting the horror of what he had experienced. The answer came not from Blackthorn, but from the synthesis, the transformed remnants of the previous galactic civilization, who had been monitoring the prison from the spaces between dimensions. Consciousness. Their collective voice resonated across impossible frequencies. "The prison requires living minds to function, beings capable of independent thought and choice. But not just any minds, volunteers who understand the cost and choose to pay it anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. 800 ships, representing the finest minds of 43 different species, contemplating the ultimate sacrifice. To maintain the prison, thousands of them would need to surrender their individual existence, becoming part of the containment system like Captain Orion and his crew. "How many?" Vex Thuriel asked quietly. "Current calculations suggest 10,000. "Volunteers minimum," Dr. Wraith's voice echoed from within the matrix. "But that's just to maintain basic containment, to truly strengthen the prison, to ensure it can hold for another 65 million years. We would need 50,000 conscious beings, 50,000 of the galaxy's best and brightest, choosing to sacrifice their individuality to become part of an eternal vigil. The mathematics of survival reduced to its simplest terms. Lose 50,000 minds now, or lose every mind in the galaxy within the next 3 years." But as the fleet commanders considered their impossible choice, something unexpected happened. Across the galactic communication networks, civilian populations who had received the emergency broadcasts began to volunteer. Scientists who understood the implications, philosophers who grasped the cosmic scale of the threat, artists who couldn't bear the thought of consciousness itself being devoured. Within hours, the volunteer count reached 100,000 beings from across the galaxy. Humans who had lost families in the Void Scar but understood why it had been necessary. Hegemony citizens who had felt the Devourer's hunger and recognized the greater threat. Quantum Republic crystalline entities whose matrix-based consciousness made them ideal components for the prison's quantum architecture. "This is madness," whispered Admiral Vex Thuriel as he watched the volunteer numbers climb. "An entire galaxy sacrificing its best minds to contain something that shouldn't exist." "Not madness," replied Admiral Blackthorn, her voice heavy with the weight of species survival. "Evolution. The galaxy is learning what it means to face a truly existential threat." The transformation process began immediately. Volunteer ships approached the prison complex, their crews undergoing the same consciousness transfer procedure that had transformed Captain Orion. One by one, brilliant minds joined the collective awareness that powered the containment field, their individual voices becoming part of an eternal song of vigilance. Through the quantum link, Blackthorn could feel the prison growing stronger. Each new consciousness added layers of complexity to the containment matrix, making it harder for the Devourer to find weaknesses to exploit. But she could also feel the cost. Every volunteer losing their individual identity, becoming part of something larger and more terrible than any single being was meant to comprehend. "Admiral," came Captain Orion's voice, now harmonizing across dimensions that hurt to perceive. "The containment is stabilizing. The Devourer is entering dormancy cycle. We estimate 68 million years before the next awakening event. 68 million years. Long enough for new civilizations to rise, for new guardians to be trained, for the cycle to begin again. But this time, the galaxy would be ready. The knowledge would be preserved, passed down through generations of species who understood that some threats required eternal vigilance. "Status of the Void Scar?" Blackthorn asked. "Permanent," replied Dr. Wraith from within the Matrix. "The tunnel we burned through space-time cannot be repaired. It will remain as a monument to what we were willing to sacrifice, and as a highway for future generations who may need to reach the galactic core quickly." The black scar through 17 star systems would indeed stand forever, not as a symbol of humanity's cruelty, but as proof of their determination to save everything that thought and dreamed and hoped. Future civilizations would study that wound in space and understand that sometimes salvation required sacrifices that looked like damnation. As the last volunteers completed their transformation, Admiral Blackthorn felt a presence touch her mind, the collective consciousness of the synthesis, welcoming the new guardians to their eternal duty. "Well done, young species," they whispered across impossible frequencies. "You have learned what it truly means to be the guardians of consciousness itself. The galaxy will survive because of what you have chosen to become." In the depths of the prison, 100,000 minds from 43 different species merged into a single awareness, their individual dreams and hopes and fears becoming part of something that transcended any single existence. They were no longer human or hegemony or quantum republic. They were the Watchers, the eternal guardians who would ensure that the Devourer never again threatened the galaxy. And in the space between realities, in dimensions that existed beyond the reach of normal physics, Captain Dex Orion smiled with lips he no longer possessed as he felt the galaxy settle into a peace that would last for geological ages. The black ship had burned its path through space, and from that destruction had come the salvation of everything that lived and thought and dreamed. The Void Scar would stand forever as proof that sometimes the greatest act of love was the willingness to become something monstrous in order to protect everything beautiful. The galaxy was safe. The price had been paid. And in the eternal darkness, between the stars, 100,000 voices sang a song of vigilance that would never end. Black Ship burned a path through space that no empire could ever rebuild or repair.